Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to the Economies and Neighbourhoods Scrutiny panel. I hope everyone is doing well. I know a number of our communities, not just here in Kirklees, but across the north, are being affected by flooding. So we're thinking of everybody, and we hope everyone's doing as well as they can. We're going to start off with the membership of the committee. So my name's Harpreet. I'm the chair of the committee, Councillor Harpreet Uppal, sorry, being a bit informal there. So I'll go to John.
So I'm Councillor John Taylor from the Kirkburton ward.
Thank you, John. Martin?
Martin Bolt from Mirfield.
Thank you. Gwen?
Councillor Gwen Lowe from Batley West, and it's my first time, so thank you.
And welcome to Gwen. We're very happy that you've joined the panel, so it's a welcome.
Thank you, Harpreet.
Thank you. Yusra?
So it's Councillor Yusra Hussain for Batley West Ward as well.
Thank you. Richard? I know Richard's having a few problems with his internet at the moment, so I'll say it's Councillor Richard Eastwood, and hopefully he will be back with us as soon as possible. We've got a couple of cabinet members on as well, Councillor Patterson and Councillor McBride as well. Richard, I think you might be back with us now. I know you're having a few problems with your audio, aren't you?
Yeah, Councillor Richard Eastwood from Lindley Ward.
Great.
Apologies if I'm in and out, but unfortunately the internet's a bit patchy today.
Okay, great. So I know we've got our IT colleagues with us here today as well, so they might be able to help Richard if you need to speak to them. But thanks to our wonderful IT colleagues, a few months, and we've also got our governance officer Jenny joining us today as well, and I think Nicola's provided some support as well. So thank you everybody who's here today. We've got a couple of apologies from our co-optees. So Ailey and Andrew Bird, Ailey Ogden, that is, and Andrew Bird aren't able to join us today. Does anyone have any interest to declare? No? Okay, thank you, members. Minutes of the previous meeting. Is any member okay to approve and second those? Does anyone want to raise anything?
Go on, as soon as I were here, I'll move them, Harpreet. Unless you want to move them, and I'll second it.
I might need to move them. I'll move them and then you second them, Martin. Is that okay?
Yeah.
Thank you very much. Admission of the public. The scrutiny panel takes place live online, so we have members of the public can listen in through the Kirklees Council YouTube page, I think it is. So brilliant. Public question time. We haven't received any questions from members of the public, and deputations and petitions. We haven't received any deputations or petitions either.
Could I just ask something on this, please, Chair?
Yes.
I mean, it's something that I've seen on other committees, and I've raised questions there as well. There should be the facility on all agendas for elected members to ask questions. It's not, obviously there is a cabinet and things, but if an elected member wanted to ask something about within the remit of this, then I think all committees should have the facility for councillors to ask a question on either something that's they can come and take part on the agenda, but if they have something that's within the remit, there should be a facility just to ask a question.
Yes, Martin, I think there is a facility under public question time. I know it's not very clear, and I think you came to Overview and Scrutiny Management Committee under that item, didn't you, as well, and asked a question. So I don't have a problem with that. Whether we need to clarify it further in the agenda, I can certainly speak to colleagues about it, but I certainly wouldn't have any problem with a council coming in and speaking on that item. So we'll have a look at that. Thanks, Councillor Bolt. Okay, so I'm going to move on to the first item on the agenda, and that's the additional restrictions grant. So Councillor Smage, who's the chair of the Overview and Scrutiny Management Committee, asked for this to come to us because it went to Cabinet previously. Obviously, the team wanted to get the grants out as soon as possible, so it's coming to us after Cabinet. But Chris Duffel, Head of Service for Business and Skills, will be providing an update. Chris, I'll hand over to you.
Thank you, Chair. I'm just going to share my screen with everyone. Hopefully, you can all see that okay. So yes, in terms of what I'm going to cover briefly today, and some of this is captured in the earlier paper. I'm going to give you a general update on progress in terms of the latest round of business grants and where we are in terms of processing those and getting the funding in the hands of businesses that need it, and also to talk a little bit about one of those grant schemes in particular, the additional restrictions grant, which is the only discretionary scheme that we have some control over in terms of how that's distributed and those businesses that are prioritised for support. So this first slide really just takes you through all of the schemes that have been live since the lockdown, the second lockdown commenced in November. I won't go through all of these line by line, but essentially some of those are focused very much on businesses that are registered for business rates, and they will then receive a payment of up to, in the case of the closed grant, of up to £3,000 for every 28 days that they're required to close. And so we've been paying those out since November. Some businesses were obviously required to remain closed when we were in Tier 3 during December, and then we've been back in lockdown again. The Christmas support payment was a one-off grant from government for wet-led pubs, i.e. those that are more dependent on or generate less of their income from food and more from beverages. And then the additional restrictions grant we're going to talk a bit more about in a second. But as you can see, range of different schemes currently available, and I'm going to focus now a bit more on where we are and sort of progress in terms of payments. And these,
Chris, just before you go ahead, I think one of our colleagues has just asked if you could switch to slideshow mode. It's just because it's not showing the full.
Apologies.
No, that's okay.
They don't want to see what's coming up next, so we get ahead of it.
I wouldn't want to speculate, Councillor, but obviously. So right, I'll. Is that helpful? Can everybody see that a bit more closely now?
Oh, that's it. Yeah,
brilliant.
We're there now.
Sorry.
Thank you, Chris.
Thank you. So, in essence, where we are at present, then, and these figures are up to date as of yesterday evening. So, we've had just over 3,000 applications for support spread across the schemes that I talked about on my previous slide. And as of yesterday evening, we'd made, and by we I mean colleagues working on this from across business rates, finance, and my team. We paid out just under £22.5 million and made over 9,900 payments. And so essentially, one of the things which has enabled us to really kind of ramp up the rate of payments. You'll have noticed from the previous slides, the Chancellor made some additional funding available to local authorities at the beginning of January, at the point when we went back into lockdown again, in terms of a single top-up payment, particularly for rate-paying businesses, of up to £9,000 to cover the period that we're expected to be in lockdown. So I'm pleased to say that for over about 2,200 businesses, we've been able to make not only that payment, but also pay in advance, if you like, up to the 15th of February. So on the right-hand graph, you will see the two spikes in payment, which reflect both of those, very substantial transactions, and that that's an important contributing factor in terms of where we now are, and we're still working our way through some of the applications that we've received, particularly the open scheme, which was for businesses that were affected prior to November, were affected in some way by social distancing or other restrictions, but were able to remain open in some form. Those applications and the additional restrictions applications are more complex in the sense that we're required to gather more evidence about the circumstances of the business and also what effect lockdown has had on their business and turnover. So we're working our way through that backlog at the moment, and happy to sort of take some more questions on where we are with that in due course. So briefly, in terms of the additional restrictions grant, as I said at the start, this is the one which is important because we're able as a local authority to members are able to determine the priorities for support within broad guidance from government. We've obviously got to use the funding primarily for business grants, but there is scope to use it more broadly if councils wish to do that. We had when we took the report to cabinet that the chair referred to at the start, we'd had an allocation of just under 8.8 million, and the Chancellor Treasury made available a further 3.9 million earlier in January. All of this has to be spent by April 2022. So we do have we have a bit of flexibility there in terms of timeframes, but obviously our imperative is to get as many businesses supported as possible. So to date, in terms of the additional restrictions grant, we've had 765 applications. We've paid out just under 200 of those, and a further 200 or so are well on in terms of their processing. As is always the case with these sorts of schemes, we have had some that we've had to reject, and often, or at least some of the time, that's because businesses have not been able to demonstrate that point about the real impact of the virus on their turnover. Obviously, we work as closely as we can with them to make sure that that they're giving us the evidence to do that. But unfortunately, sometimes that isn't possible. So essentially, where we expect to be, assuming that we'll continue to make payments under the ARG scheme until the end of March, we're expecting to have spent just under 3.25 million of that allocation, which based on that forecast is based on the criteria that apply to the scheme currently. So what we're looking to do is really to kind of open up the eligibility criteria a bit further. There's an expectation that we will. I talked about that one-off top-up payment of up to £9,000 that business rate-paying businesses have been paid out. I think there's quite a strong expectation that where we can, we will mirror that for those businesses that are in this pool. So those that are not ratepayers, or those that are in the supply chain to the retail, hospitality, and leisure sectors that have been most affected. And that's been one of the important benefits of having the ARG grants available to us, is that not only have we been able to support those businesses that have been closed and very directly affected, we've also been able to support businesses in the supply chain. So whether those are breweries or food manufacturers or others that have really seen their markets severely affected by what's happened over the last few months. Cabinet also approved gave us the ability to support self-employed or home-based businesses back in November, but with a focus on those that had not been able to receive support through other government other government schemes like the Self-Employed Income Support Scheme, which many of you will be familiar with. And there is a proposal to look again at that criteria to see if we can broaden it further to be able to support more self-employed residents who can clearly demonstrate that they're in need. So particularly when we've made those top-up payments that I'm talking about, we expect that will allow us to get a further significant tranche of funding out to businesses. This is a bit of a moving feast, so we need to retain a bit of a buffer within all of these calculations to make sure that we've got sufficient funding there to cater for new applications, or indeed if we need to extend and keep the scheme open beyond March, if for any reason lockdown restrictions are continued beyond then. So there's a healthy buffer built into these figures that will allow us to do that. We're also then looking to ring fence up to 2 million to provide some further quite specific support, and that's really captured in the last three bullets there. So looking very much to be able to increase the support for those key voluntary sector organisations that have played a key role in the pandemic, in the response to the pandemic, and that we need to ensure are around in future to be able to continue to play that important role. So looking at creating a dedicated grant or investment scheme to support those key voluntary sector organisations, looking to extend the existing startup and retention grants that we have in place to support business growth, and as many of you will know, we have a scheme in place that allows us to grant discretionary rate relief and provide small capital grants, and that very much is focused on businesses that are able not only to survive but to grow, or businesses and sectors that have growth potential in these current challenging times. So looking to extend our existing grant scheme to be able to invest more in those businesses that are going to be able to create jobs in future, and also look at how we can use potentially some of this funding to support other local economic recovery activity. So essentially, Chair, we've been having these conversations with leading members. We've presented to the Outbreak Control Board, which obviously involves MPs and the leaders of all of the parties. Obviously, strong interest in progress in getting these grants out to businesses. Really, obviously keen to sort of take questions from members on overall progress, on the specifics of proposed changes to the additional restrictions grants, and your thoughts on perhaps areas that we should be prioritising. Some of those changes, if they're minor in nature, will be taken via officer decision in due course, and that was tied back to the original cabinet report. The proposals for ring fence funding that I talked about in the last slide, we expect to bring a report to cabinet on in due course. Thank you, Chair. I'll now try and stop sharing this, and obviously happy to take further questions.
Great, thank you for that, Chris. I've got a few hands up, but just to make it a little bit easy for me, if everyone could just type speak into the comments box, it just makes it easy for me to see everything. So I'm going to go with the comments box. So the first one I've got is Councillor Bolt. Thank you, Chair, and thanks to Chris for that. The first one, just for getting things into context, are the grants discretionary, Chris? Does the council have that discretion on how it allocates funding?
For the discretionary grants, the council has discretion to identify the I guess the priority sectors or types of business that it wants to support, and also the discretion to determine the amount of awards. So discretion operates in the sense of agreeing a scheme, as opposed to discretion in terms of individual applications. We've got the discretion to agree the scheme that businesses can then apply into, but the discretion is around the scheme rather than dealing with each application on its merits.
Okay,
if
thanks.
That makes sense.
Because I've had 3 issues that have been raised with me about this, and first one is a long-running one, and it's not just Kirklees that this affects, but there is a business sector who run fairgrounds, predominantly members of the Showmen's Guild of Great Britain. We have a number of showmen based in Kirklees. Off the top of my head, we've got them in Dewsbury, Batley, Cleckheaton, Birstall and Shepley, I believe. As far as I know, they've had great difficulty from getting discretionary grants from the council, and some of those have not operated since November 2019, because traditionally fairgrounds stop work in the winter, and when they were getting ready to come out during for Easter 2020, we were going into lockdown, and those who did try and operate, particularly in Kirklees, were closed down. Even if you try to operate with a COVID secure environment, the council wouldn't let you. Strangely enough, circuses could operate, but fairgrounds couldn't. So that's one sector that appears to have difficulty, partly, I suppose, because some of them may not pay business rates. The Dewsbury one, their premises that they rent from Kirklees are on an old railway siding. Another business which has been in touch, a company of demolition contractors, who said on social media that they were refused because their business rates were £250 over the threshold which they said Kirklees had set. And one which has come up this week, a business in Mirfield, the business owners, during the COVID period, have changed their business status from being a partnership or non-limited. They formed a limited company in the same premises, same business that they've been operating for years, and have been unable to receive any financial support because they had no trading history. Now, again, this is why I ask about discretionary, because it would seem that, yes, legally a company changes when it becomes a limited company, but in the current circumstances where you can understand why people may want to have that limited status in case the worst does happen and their business folds, that the principals would not then be personally liable. But we should be able to look at this and go, yes, Mr. X, and I won't name them for GDPR, but yes, Mr. X, your business in Mirfield, your gymnasium and trampoline business, has been in operation for a number of years. We can see that you've previously got a history of rates, etc., etc. We can look at your accounts. You've changed into a limited company, and you're a continuation of business. It's as you say, it's startup and retention. And one of the final slides there was the way forward. And I'm always cautious, Chair, about consultations and with respect to officer decisions. We saw the downfall of that with a recent officer decision to change the way that people interact with the planning service. Could I ask that before the portfolio holder and staff make a decision, that we do seek some soundings from the public about this is what we're hoping to do, what are your, so that people who've had the experience that I've talked about and others can at least contribute. We don't want to operate in a bubble. So let's try and gain a wider stakeholder engagement. Obviously, the decision making then will be made by the cabinet member and staff. But we should be seen to be open on this. Thanks.
Thank you. Chris, do you want to respond? And then we'll bring Peter in as well.
Absolutely. So just thanks for that, Councillor. But just picking up some of those points. Then so certainly your point around fairgrounds, I agree is potentially more difficult when it comes to being eligible for those schemes that are for business rate payers. I'm aware under the previous discretionary grant scheme that we operated last summer, we were able to, and we worked very closely with the relevant trade association, and so we were able to support some of those members through the discretionary grant scheme that we had in place at the time. So and obviously very happy. Again, if there are specific cases that you'd like to kind of discuss in detail, obviously very happy to do that, because the essence of the discretionary grant, the additional restrictions grant scheme that we have in place now, is that it is to support those businesses that have been impacted but fall outside the business rate system. So I'd hope that that's something that we can take forward. As far as the position with the demolition contractors, I'm assuming in that case, that their application was for perhaps the closed grant scheme, or one of those that was linked that's for business rate payers specifically. In that case, specifically for that scheme, there shouldn't be an upper threshold in terms of rateable value. There was first time around. So if you take your sort of mind back to the scheme that was the government scheme that was operating that's kind of started in March and April last year, then the cutoff was £51,000 in terms of rateable value. This time around, that upper, because businesses are required to close, that upper ceiling isn't in place. I guess there's a sort of broader question perhaps about which of the schemes that they should have applied for, but again, I'm happy to kind of pick that.
Thank you, Chris.
With you in detail. Is sort of keen that we can try and resolve that if we can. I think your point about sort of general point about kind of changes in where there are changes in a company's status that potentially affect either who the liable party is for business rates. I know we've had colleagues in the business rates team have had a number of those sorts of cases. I know they're working hard to be able to make any of those changes that we're required to make to the system to ensure that that in those circumstances, businesses can then apply and hopefully secure the funding that they need. That is a broader issue. We certainly a lot of the cases, the sort of inquiries that I see, a number of them fall into that broad category, and that's something that certainly colleagues in business rates are very aware of, and we want to try and resolve quickly. I think your final point about public consultation, I mean, that's obviously something that I can take away. We are certainly trying to engage as widely as we can with members to ensure that we get that broad spectrum of views. And I think and had in fact done that when we took that original report to cabinet around the scheme, because obviously what we're trying to do is make sure that we're not missing out on any key sectors that you will have a good sense through your constituency inbox are being affected. So we're very keen to continue to engage as widely as we can before any decisions are made. Absolutely.
Thanks, Chris. Peter, did you want to just respond? Then I'll bring in John after that.
It very well. I think as you're getting down to dealing with the smaller companies, there is a problem of establishing what is the nature of the business, particularly with the smaller ones, and what are the margins of discretion. And I think the way that this has been publicised nationally suggests that all that haven't been immediately dealt with and approved have been dismissed. That's an impression you would get. And I think that the reality is many of the more difficult ones are being taking longer to understand, interpret and apply. Chris, is that broadly the nature of the problem?
Certainly, in some cases, yes, Councillor McBride. I think that's fair.
That's, I see, where the margin is, where the difficulties are.
Okay. Thank you, Councillor McBride. I'm going to bring in Councillor Taylor and then Councillor Eastwood.
Thanks, Harpit. Firstly, Chris, just a big thank you for the work that you and the team have been doing, and I think it's important that we acknowledge that on this call, that, you know, certainly your team and the finance team, the other people who've been working on these grant schemes, this isn't what they were planning on doing if we went back to March last year, is it at all? And they've got up to speed, and the speed with which some of the grants have been got out has been quite impressive. And I think it's important that we as councillors recognise that and are seen to recognise that. So, you know, please take that message back as well. A couple of specifics around the discretionary fund. I'm pleased to see that we're looking a bit broader at businesses that have been impacted by the requirement for hospitality, retail and leisure to close. I recall that I've spoken to a couple of businesses in my ward that I hadn't appreciated how they were impacted. And I'll give you one example. I think possibly, Chris, you may have heard this one before. I have in my ward a hat shop. The lady makes hats. She's a milliner. She was not required to close, but in the week I saw her, her total sales for the week were £14. Because if you imagine, a lot of ladies buy hats when they're going to weddings or particular, Gwen's smiling, particular posh do's. I'm sure you had a few when you were mayor, Gwen. And of course, none of this is happening. So they are this lady is directly impacted by the closure of hospitality and leisure, and it's one that might not get picked up. And I also went to a bit of a posh boutique in the same area where it was a similar story, that, you know, a lot of the clothes that they sold were, you know, the mother of the bride outfit. Well, of course, nobody's shopping for that type of thing. So I just would hope, Chris, that we take on board that breadth of thinking about when we're looking at discretionary and the impact on hospitality, because it's not just the direct suppliers of hospitality, the caterers and people like that, or the suppliers of food, but also those other things that people need when they are, you know, when you're doing that type of stuff. So I just ask if we could take that on board. The other area that we've not mentioned here, and I know I've come across a number that have struggled to find support, is musicians and other performance artists. And again, they are directly impacted again by the closure of particularly hospitality and leisure, and they don't have any other way of receiving funds. And quite often, they're perhaps their business isn't as well structured to fit nicely and easily into one of our grant schemes. So I just would hope that we would try, if we're able to look favourable on people like that as well. So thanks for that, Chris. Just a few things to think about, really. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Taylor, and yeah, and thank you for your kind words at the start. And it is a big team effort involving colleagues from a number of services, and so yeah, I'll certainly pass on those thanks. Yeah, and in terms of you know, your point about ensuring that we're looking broadly enough at those supply chains, I think that's a point well made, and we do ask businesses to just be able to demonstrate. You know, in your case, you know, we would be asking the milliner to be able to provide us with some evidence that a big proportion of their business is serving those markets, and that's, you know, that then allows us to be able to hopefully move forward. In terms of musicians and those kind of freelance workers as well in the creative industries, yes, I think that's a wider national problem as well. We are looking very much at the self-employed category here to make sure that, you know, that's broad enough to be able to pick up self-employed freelance workers of that type, and then we're also, colleagues in other services are also looking at is there something we can do more widely about providing business support for that broader music and creative industry sector as well. So that may well be one of the things that we come back and talk to Cabinet about further in due course.
Thanks, Chris.
Thank you both. Councillor Eastwood.
All right, thanks, Chair. Hopefully you can hear me loud and clear. Folks, I've got an unstable internet connection at the moment, so it's sounding a bit like Norman Collier at times. So hopefully I'll come through loud and clear. Just a couple of things, really. Regarding the backlog that you mentioned, I was just wondering, is there a time frame to get that backlog cleared? Because I know some businesses obviously are desperate for the money, and one criticism that's been passed on to us was sort of breakdown in communications between the applicant from when the application's being received. They're being told it's being processed, and then time drags on and on and on and on, and then they just, one or two cases have been where they've been feel as though they're being left in limbo, and then on a couple of cases once we've stepped in and brought this to the attention of officers, it's been dealt with very quickly. So one of my other questions is, what measures are actually in place to monitor applications from being received and then sort of monitoring the progress so that you do keep the applicants in the loop?
Thanks, Councillor Eastwood. Yeah, in terms of your first point, then as far as the additional restrictions grants are concerned, then we're now dealing with applications that were made in the first week of January. So we are, clearly it takes some time to be able to review the evidence that businesses provide and to do the important prepayment due diligence that we're required to do. But we're certainly working our way through those pretty quickly now, and we do tend to work through these by date order, which obviously makes sense and is fair to all applicants, really. So we're working our way through those pretty quickly now. There are some applications for the LRSG Open grant, which were those that businesses that were affected sort of back in the summer, where I know we're still waiting for some further evidence that we've asked businesses to provide. So essentially, we are working through these as quickly as possible. Certainly for the additional restrictions applications, we're trying to turn those around within a 3-week time frame. As I say, we're now up to early January in terms of dealing with that backlog. So we're confident that we'll get those moving as quickly as we can. And as ever, all of this is about striking the right balance between getting this funding to businesses that need it very quickly and doing the due diligence that we need to do before approving an application to make sure that everything is in order. Sadly, nationally, not here, but nationally, there have been a number of quite significant cases of fraud and other scams that have resulted through people applying fraudulently to the scheme, and this is public money, and you would obviously expect us to be very prudent in the way that we deal with that. But it is about striking a balance, and I agree with you. It needs to be about keeping applicants up to date and communicating with them and being realistic about timeframes. All those things are really very important.
Okay, thank you for that. Members just the members who haven't spoken yet, does anyone want to ask a question? Councillor Eastwood, did you have another question? Your hand's still up. No, I don't think he has. I think he's put his hand down. Sorry. No, that's all right. Did you want to ask something else? No. Okay, perfect. So thanks, Chris. I mean, I would agree in terms of the ARG grant and the priority that you've outlined so far. You know, I think that the supply chain non-rate payers are really important ones that we need to focus on, given that there's been such a focus on quite a number of the grants on business rates and rateable value. And, you know, for myself, I do feel that is quite outdated. You know, I understand to some extent why the government's gone down that road, but it's not always the best way of understanding how a business works, and like I say, it is a little bit outdated. I think the self-employed is, and particularly freelancers, as John mentioned, the creative industries. We know that's been an issue nationally. You know, we do have this gap of about, I think they've said about 3 million people who haven't been supported through the numerous schemes. So, you know, I think if we can provide a bit of focus there, that would be really good. And I'm glad to see the ring fence of 2 million provide some support to the VCS anchor organisations, which I think we'd all say have had quite an impact in our wards and communities as well. So that is really good to see. Just to recap on what some members have said, we said there should be some more engagement around the ARG scheme to make sure that we're getting views from as many people as possible to make sure the right people are able to access the grants, making sure we've got a breadth in understanding in terms of the supply chains and the people that do need to be picked up through the ARG scheme. I hope you can hear me okay, because I've got the bad network quality sign coming up. And then there was the stuff around the communication process as the grants being processed as well. So, and I guess my only other thought, Chris, I wanted to ask you, there's a number of schemes that have been put together, understandably so in some regards, because we've had different tiers and lockdowns. But I do wonder how complex that is actually for businesses, and whether actually what would be preferable is something that would be just a longer term support to business in specific sectors. That's out of our hands at a local level, in a sense. We know the majority of the schemes aren't discretionary, actually. You know, there's a number of parameters that have to be met, but just wondering if you've picked up anything around the complexity of the schemes, and because it's stop, whether there's been an impact in terms of the numbers that are applying for the schemes, and understanding of all the different schemes as well for our local businesses.
Yeah, I think it's fair to say it probably is reasonably complex if you're a business seeking to apply, and as you say, you have a number of those schemes in front of you. You know, what we've tried to do, and I think it's a work in progress. We'll keep looking at it and making changes. We've tried to simplify it through, where possible, having one online form for all of the kind of prescribed government schemes that we don't really have any influence over in terms of eligibility. So we try to do some of that through a single form. You know, we've got frequently answered questions on the website. You know, we're constantly looking at, because obviously the position is changing regularly. We're constantly looking at making sure the website's up to date, and we'll continue to do that, to make sure that it's as simple as it can be. In the kind of medium to long term, obviously, we hope that we'll be able to kind of move back to a situation where we're not having to, we're not having to kind of deal with this kind of reasonably complex system of grants, and we're sort of moving back to a degree of normality. But obviously, in the intervening period, we've got to make sure that it's as simple and accessible as we can.
Okay, thank you. Just one final question, and we've got to move on. But the ARG runs until this payment is until 2022, so it's 12 million up until 2022. Rav, that's correct, isn't it? So, are you expecting that there might be another phase of it, or?
I think it really depends how quickly we're all able to move out of lockdown. At this stage, I don't think I am expecting a further payment, but it's very much dependent on what happens in the middle of February and the kind of roadmap out of the current restrictions.
And do you think that's enough, 12 million until 2022?
On the basis that we expect, at the moment, the assumption that we're making is that we'll need to continue to make payments until the end of March, and then potentially extend that into April if we're still in a situation where large numbers of businesses are closed. We've got some flexibility. We've got that buffer that I talked about to cover some of that. The 2022 date is simply the date which we've currently been given by government. In the event that we haven't spent all of it by then there is the possibility that government could seek to claw back the funding from the council, but that's some way away at this point.
Okay, thank you. Gwen, did you want to ask a question? I can see your hands up. Sorry.
Yeah, can you hear me? I just wanted to apologise. My internet just went down totally. So I just wanted to apologise, particularly to Chris. Chris, I'm sorry, I missed your presentation. But can I just say thank you for all the hard work you're doing and all the support that you're giving people out there. It's much appreciated. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. And obviously we'll share the presentation with members of the panel. So happy to do that, of course.
Thank you, Chris, and I'll just reiterate what Gwen and John have both said. Really, a huge thanks to you and your team. I know in a council call with the chief exec, she did mention that the business team was one of the teams that were really sort of under the cosh at the moment, given all the different schemes and making sure that you get these grants out as soon as possible as well. So thank you so much for everything that the team are doing. So we really appreciate that. And thanks for being here today. Thank you, Chris.
Thank you, Chair.
Thanks. Oh, sorry, Yusra, did you want to ask a question just before Chris goes?
Yeah, I just wanted to reiterate a big thanks as well to Chris. I know how hard the team's been working and everyone's sort of asked the questions I wanted to, so I don't want to repeat things. So yeah thank you very much, Chris. Yeah.
Thanks, Chris.
Thank
Cheers.
you.
Okay, I'm going to bring in Will Acorn now because we're moving to the fly tipping part of the agenda.
Hello.
Hi, Will. I'll head over to you.
Okay, so I've got a presentation. So just a bit of a verbal update on where we are on fly tipping, and some of the statistics of the issues we've got, some of the actions we're taking, a little bit of a behind the scenes look at some of the different ways of working we're trialing, and sort of then opening the floor to welcome some feedback, some things if you've seen improvements, things where you might want to see some improvements. So a bit of a general discussion. So if I just try and share my screen. Right. Right, so let me know when you can see that coming through.
Yeah, we can see it. I think you just need to press this. Oh, there you go. Yep, that's perfect. Thank you.
Lovely. So I'll go through this quickly because I'm conscious people probably are very keen to ask questions. So I'll give a very quick overview. So I'm just going to cover these areas. Again, just an overview of some of the new structures, an overview of what fly tipping is, some of the enforcement work we're doing, some changes we're making, and I'll pick those up as we go. So we have restructured the team. We've moved fly tipping into a single team. We've excluded at this point private land, obviously, because that's the landowners, and K&H, just because of some complexities in K&H's merger back into the organisation. But the idea is that we will continue to expand it into K&H land as they come back in. But generally, we have one single team dealing with all of the council land, and we have streamed it into a specific team now, located under the Green Space Action Team. They sit alongside the ward rangers, which is, I'll get into some more detail, but they're expansion of the ward squads that we had, and obviously our enforcement team as well. So it's trying to bring all the different elements that come to play here into one single team, for obvious reasons. So a bit of a flavour of what the GAT team spend their time doing. So the majority is fly tipping, as you can see, followed by waste on land, which are very similar issues. Then abandoned vehicles, dogs and public rights of way is lower down the end. So the majority of the team anyway naturally spend their time doing fly tipping and waste on land. So just before we get into some of the details and statistics, generally fly tipping is that sort of definition on the screen. Anything less than a bag full we treat as litter. So anything we're talking about today is your bags of waste upwards, and I've just got a couple of examples of the sort of things we're dealing with day in, day out. So this is a fly tip at Paul Lane, Mirfield. So this shows that we do get the issues down some of the rural lanes. It is quite significant accumulations. Some of the issues we're seeing tend to be on a commercial level, tend to be your Facebook, can you clear it? Or
just for clarity, Will, Paul Lane's in Dalton.
Oh, if you caught me out there, is it just over the border?
It's quite a way over the border into your ward, is that, isn't it, Peter?
I'll take your word for it, Martin.
Apology, it's quite big. It might spread across both, Martin. Sorry about that.
It would have to be big.
Apologies. So it's just demonstrating that there's some rural elements to it, but what we try to tend to see in rural areas is quite big accumulations coming through. And we also get, this is Byram Court, Huddersfield. So, you know, people tend to think that it's just fly tipping tends to be on those rural areas. Well, it doesn't. We get them everywhere. And you can see here that this is quite industrial scale, commercial scale type fly tipping that we deal with. And the team do really well. You can see the after photo there. So what's interesting, though, when you look at the actual statistics of what we do collect, that 50% of fly tipping is household waste and black bag waste. So this is waste that you can get rid of in your black bag, in your curbside collection, along with everything else, or you can go to the household waste site with. There's no restrictions on these. Only 10% is construction waste, and I know there's been a lot of debate over the previous years on soil and rubble, but it is a very small proportion of what we actually do, as is white goods. So the most of the things we are dealing with are your general household waste. These are some of the statistics over the years. And what you'll notice on this is there's no particular pattern to it. So this is one of the reasons why fly tipping is so difficult to really predict, so difficult to deal with, is because there is generally no pattern year on year. We've had years that have dipped, we've had years that have peaked. Obviously around here you're looking at the COVID, and some of the COVID, in fact, we have seen an increase. But generally it is very, very difficult to predict where it is, what it is, and who's doing it. Just some comparisons. So this is taken from waste data flow. So every single thing that we collect proactively and everything we collect that comes through to us goes on to what's called waste data flow, which is DEFRA's big waste national database. We log it by type, by size, and then it can calculate estimated costs and other statistics. So we can start to look at what sort of issue we have. So obviously you can see we don't have a significant issue with some of our neighbours, but we do have one bigger than some others. So it's a real mixed bag. Obviously, there's some proportionality to this given the size of the authorities, but it's not saying that we've got a huge issue, but we do have an issue, and which is why we've sort of reshaped the team to start to tackle it. So getting into some of the new approach. Again, I said we've got a new team, which is specifically focused on fly tipping. We've put it next to some linked services and the enforcement team as well. So the idea is that it comes into one team, The same team can collect it as gathers the evidence as does the prosecutions. So we're keeping it as all in one team as possible, as slick as possible. We did launched last year a new online reporting tool, and this is just a little snapshot of it, which shows what the reference is, what it is, who it is, so people don't have to repeatedly call us in. They don't have to repeat the same issue. They can then actually follow this, and we provide updates via this as well. So this is a firm step platform that we've started on fly tipping. We pushed to street lighting, and it's something that we're pushing across our frontline services to try and help people report things better and more accurately. Because some of the issues we saw was a report came in, but it's quite a bland description. Well, this actually gives us very, very good data to get there as quick as possible. As part of this as well, although we do hold landowners to account for their responsibilities, we do also help them with this. So where they have had accumulations, we do gather evidence for them, and we do help them prosecute as well. So we're helping to support landowners as much as we can. Prior to, in between COVID, because obviously we launched at the beginning of one of the first lockdowns, and we've just had a third lockdown. But if you look at the period in between, this service managed to get our response time to things coming in, to everything being cleared and evidence gathered to 3 days. While previously it could be a number of weeks depending on which bit of land it was. And I think that's a really good improvement. And I think people started to really see that come through. Hopefully when we're through this current lockdown, we'll be getting back to that level as well. Again, it's key that we engage with communities. And so there's a good, strong working relationship with our Safer Kirklees, especially their community support officers. So we can engage, educate communities. As I mentioned before, some of the issues we do see are with your Facebooks. People posting waste in their backyard, people coming to collect it for a fiver, but it doesn't get disposed of properly. So our enforcement approach. So again, I said we investigate waste on all land within Kirklees. We do hold landowners to account for their responsibilities, but we do also support them. And we will, like I say here, we will prosecute anyone that's been seen dumping waste. We do also deal within this team with dog issues, with prior infringements, abandoned vehicles. So it's quite a multi-disciplined enforcement team. And we, on the next one, it is difficult to prosecute. I'm not going to lie. All of this needs to come together to get successful prosecutions. So currently the legislation, the burden of evidence is not swayed in the favour of us to get some of these outcomes. We are seeing that move. There's been some recent changes into the fixed penalty notices. There's a white paper going through government that's trying to look at how we digitally track waste, all of which will help build to being able to see where things are born and where things are got rid of. Here's some worth putting up a few statistics just to show what we did last year. So you can see we had 15 fly tipping offences, and this is under a certain section. There's a multitude of different legislation that we use. Community protection notices, we issued 40 of those. We then followed up where they didn't comply with them 7 times, and we had 8 court appearances, which is where people haven't complied with us, haven't worked with us, and we've taken it all the way. And this gives you a flavour of some of the successes we've had. Some of these are relatively low, but I think we are building now. We've got this dedicated team and resource. We are building momentum on this, and we had success only last week with a few £1,000s awarded. So this is building momentum, I think, now. CCTV is part of this new offer as well. So we have procured mobile cameras and we have procured static cameras. We're looking at an intelligence and evidence-based deployment for that. We do have a site that we're looking to get the first one up. COVID and the latest lockdown has impacted on that a bit. But it is, again, it is difficult. I know people think that's, it's quite obvious. Can we just put a CCTV camera up? But if you put it up on a street lighting column, you need to consider the wind load. We don't want to create a safety issue where we overload it so that in high winds it takes the pole down. We've got to get the power supply in, etc. But we are working through this and learning through this, and we expect over the coming weeks and months that we will be getting a lot more mobile and static cameras out there to try and catch people. Quickly through onto the ward rangers. So this was previously what was known as the ward squads, which was a seasonal offer to councillors to say we'll come in winter, we'll come in summer to try and do some of that low level environmental works. And whilst it was successful, what we saw was that real demand for it. Now these are some of the edges that obviously with austerity, some of the gaps open up in services, and this was some of the gaps that we're looking to close now as we're investing in services. So we actually increased the ward squad teams up to, I think we've got 14 teams now. They're available all year round. Councillors can send information in. This is just a flavour of some of the things that they do, from small-scale highway repairs to clearing vegetation to grubbing out. And it's been well received. You know, we soft launched this in November, and looking at the statistics up to January, you can see there's hundreds of requests come through and hundreds of things being actioned. The next stage on this is trying to build that community capacity in there, just so that we can, you know, if we're returning up on site to do something and the community come along with us, we can achieve a lot more than we're just working by ourselves. But I think we, you know, with that dedicated resource now, we are really starting to make a difference on this. And some of the examples, you know, generally, so generally you can see, you know, this is the sort of thing that where the gaps opened up in the services, and this is the sort of thing that we want to get back to. You can see here as well some of these little off the beat ones that we're trying to get back into with the grubbing out and getting that basic core service right, but directed by councillors, by communities, because they know the area better. They know the bits that we need to get back on top of, and the bits that once we've got back on top of them, we can put the service back in there as a scheduled regular maintenance. So that was a whistle stop tour of fly tipping.
Thanks for that, Will.
Yeah.
Thank you. Have we got any questions, members? Yep, so Councillor Eastwood first.
Oh, hi. Hi, thanks, Chair. Okay, thanks, Will, for the update. It's good to see some improvements on what was happening up to about 8 months ago. I know we had quite a few problems in the Linley ward, particularly down Grimesca Road, and I know that there were plans to install CCTV down there. I'm not so sure it's been fully installed as yet, but it's certainly part way. I'd like to thank our ranger who's done the clearing. He's done an amazing job. We just had one just this last weekend with lots of broken branches with a heavy snowfalls, and it's been cleared away within 2 days of our request being put in. So I'd like to applaud that gentleman, and Gwyn Jones, I believe his name is. So if you could pass on our thanks to him. And then obviously fly tipping in our ward, it seems to have died down, so touch wood, it stays like that. But obviously it is something that crops up all across Kirklees, and it's good to see that some people are getting fined and taken to court. So yeah, well done. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Eastwood. So I've got Councillor Ball, Councillor Law, Chris Friend, and Councillor Hussain. So Councillor Ball.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I'm only Gwen on a weekend. Just looking back at some of the slides, in fact, I'll flick back on them while I'm just teeing that up. As has just been said, yeah, let's congratulate the speed and approachability of the ward guys. Yeah, Billy, who I've had some contact with. I suspect that some of the 17 that were logged in Mirfield are also some of the ones that I've picked up and passed through when I've been walking across the road in Liversidge and Gummersall, and the speed of response has been great. Fly tipping, yeah, we can see from the time, something like what, 36% of the action team time is allocated to fly tipping. So I think it is, yeah, we've got to recognise it is still a big problem in Kirklees. It far outstrips time spent on other issues. And I was looking also the fly tipping incidents and investigations, the year-on-year stats. If all those wiggly lines on page 9, if I'm understanding correct, and we only have data up until September of this year, but we seem, again, fly tipping incidents 20 to 21, peaking in June to July of over 1,000, is nearly twice as much as we've had in other years. So, I mean, I don't know when we get the data from September through to December, September to January, but it'd be interesting to see how that one's going. Will, we've got these teams in place, and you mentioned that some of them have the enforcement powers. I think one thing, Chair, that I'd be interested in is to look at the breadth of enforcement powers. Are they specifically for fly tipping, etc.? If a member of staff and is enforcement split between different members of staff, the people who are out on the site, as Richard and I have just alluded to, the hardworking frontline staff, if they see someone throwing some litter down, could they advise them to pick it up? And if they don't, can they fine them? Similar with the perennial problem of dog mess. These are the guys who are out there as the front line, and as well as having the reactive powers and giving them the power to enforce it may also help, I think. CCTV, and when we talk about CCTV and enforcement issues, I'm reminded of the wise words of David Sheard. You're not laughing, Peter. In a council meeting.
It's coming from you, Martin, that you consider David being wise.
No, I said they were wise words.
Sure.
In a council meeting, Sheardy once said that we had the capacity to put CCTV in Coke cans and deal with this kind of issue. No reason to doubt what Sheardy says, because he says you never say anything in public that you don't know the answer to. So have we got in the marketplace self-contained? So you've got a battery, solar or whatever. Have we got these discrete and self-contained cameras? Because clearly Paul Lane at Huddersfield there that you mentioned, HD5 OPU, Peter.
Thank you for the reference.
There might not even be it's an old battered up old road, is Helm Lane and Paul Lane. There might not even be a camera up there. There might not be a street lamp, but it is somewhere which is repeatedly, because of the remote nature of it, winding road, just across the old railway line from the Greenway, somewhere where that kind of thing that we see is prevalent. So in order to catch people, you can't rely on there being a power source. So I'm sure there must be something that's self-contained. Have we got it? Thank you.
Yep, I can sort of come back on those. The peak that I pointed out in June, that was directly related to the lockdown. So what we saw during the lockdown was that we were finding a lot more waste by litter bins, that lower level fly tipping, and we saw it calm down as you saw it coming down. The reason that the statistics aren't as up to date is because it goes through an audit process with waste data flow, so it's almost a quarter behind every time. But the minute we get it through, I can sort of push through all that update.
Sorry, can I clarify, Will? Waste by litter bins, you're counting as fly tipping?
So if it's bags of waste by a litter bin, that our teams proactively, we are counting that in statistics as well. So
over the Christmas period, when litter bins weren't being emptied, and residents, as I've seen in Robertstown and Hartshead, were putting containers and putting bin bags in them outside of the existing litter bins to try and contain the litter in a place where the no Kirklees staff were passing and collecting litter. And there's one that you might want to look at the top of Clough Lane at Robertstown, the junction of Clough Lane, Church Road and Prospect Road in the Liversedge and Gomersall ward of Robertstown. Residents did it. They put a sign up saying, please use this overflow bin. As far as Kirklees are saying, that proactive residential approach is fly tipping.
That's the way it comes in. Technically, yes. But we never stop correcting litter bins through the Christmas period. We always have a staffing in throughout that period, barring Christmas Day itself, obviously, and New Year's Day and Boxing Day. I think the only days that they don't work. But that's the level. So I know that when people look back in statistics, they'll see that our numbers upticked, but we wanted to capture everything and not have anything that could be thrown back at us that said you're not counting everything, because we want to see the totality of the issue. Because even though the intention was not to be fly tipping, in that example you provided, there's an issue somewhere upstream that we need to deal with. So we need to capture that. So it's anything that's a black bag or above, we are capturing, even if the street cleaning team are picking it up at the side of the road as well. That's why we flipped that, so we know everything possible within the statistics, 'cause it's more meaningful to do something about it then. So like I said, we did have some increase in COVID. We're expecting a little bit more. It's been a bit less now. I think some of it was linked to the fact that we had to shut household waste sites, if I'm being honest. But once we could sort of got the green light to open them again, work through the backlog, I think we probably won't see as much of an increase, but we're anticipating a little bit. But I can come back in a couple of months' time or something and update on the statistics so we keep that tracking. Breadth of enforcement powers. Obviously, we can't be everywhere, so we do rely on people providing evidence. It is very easy to give evidence, so it's about what you saw, what date it was, what time it was, a registration plate, for example. And that's where some of the government has helped. They've changed some legislation, so if we get that and a registration plate, we can find the driver, and the driver gets the fine. And there's no argument about was it the passenger, was it the driver? It's the driver that gets the fixed penalty notice. So we do have our street cleaners that see things coming into the process, but it does take sometimes, if it goes to court, that person being willing to give that evidence, be that written or within the court sometimes. And sometimes that's where we fall down, because people don't want to go all that way or don't want to see that. But if we push a fixed penalty, that's where we're seeing a lot more traction now. And it is really easy to do. People think it's difficult. It's not. We've got special books that we hand out to our staff that can make the notes in it. They pass it through into the green space team, and they take it from there now. The CCTV. Some of the issues with the self-contained one is that you can just put it in your pocket and walk off with it. So we have been quite careful about what we're trying to trial, but we are trying a two-stream approach. One is on the street lighting columns. So as Councillor Eastwood pointed out, Grimesco's the one where we're closest to getting it off the ground now. And we were literally inches away from that before the latest lockdown. So hopefully we can get that moving again. And we have also secured, I think it's 4 mobile cameras as well. So we are looking at that mobile approach, but there is a bit of a difficulty in a local authority using CCTV because there's legislation we have to comply with. There's things we have to do in a certain way that perhaps others, more private people, don't, because there's a higher burden on people in public positions. But we are trying to work through that and seeing what does the mobile bring us, what does the fix give us as well. And it really is, it's a trial, so let's see what comes from it. Hopefully we'll start to capture some of this stuff and get those prosecutions up and dissuade people from doing it in the first place, I think.
Okay, thank you, Will. I'm just mindful of time, everybody, and we've got another presentation as well. So I was going to bring in Gwen, but I think she's lost her internet connection again, unfortunately. So if she comes back in time, I'll try and bring her in. Chris Friend, do you want to come in?
Yeah, thanks. Hi, Will. Just three questions for you. We obviously don't have very much of a problem around Golka or Slough, so great job, you guys, for that. But I'm just interested in this: what constitutes fly tipping on private land? And you say you work with the landowners to enforce it. But what if the landowner doesn't really care? Could you enforce him to actually do it? And what would that enforcement take? What format? Thanks.
Thanks, Chris. Yeah, so like I said, if we perceive something to be a fly tip, then we obviously approach the landowner. We try to work with them, say where they can get rid of the waste, try and help them where we can, try and gather evidence. If it turns into a nuisance, or it becomes something where actually it's detrimenting the environment, it's detrimenting the land itself, there's risk of pollution, then that's the category that showed that was waste on land. So there is a separate set of legislation there where we can take people to task on waste on land. We serve notice on them. They've got so long before they have to clear it, and there's certain loopholes, and it does end up in court as an ultimate end to that. Generally, landowners tend to work with us. It's rare they don't, and we do try to work with ones that get multiple fly tips on their land. We do try and recognise that. But there's only so much resource as a local authority we have. So we do have to balance what we do help versus where the landowner needs to take their responsibility as well.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Hussain.
Yeah, hi, Will. I just wanted to say a big thank you, really, because I've used your service a fair few times, so it's been really effective, and you've responded in a good and timely manner. I think my questions have already been sort of asked, so I'm not going to repeat myself again, but I just want to say a really big thank you to all the frontline staff, really, working through this period of time, which has been really, really difficult for all. So a big thank you, and thanks for sorting out my casework as well. Thank you.
No problem.
Thank you. Councillor Eastwood.
Oh, hi, thanks, Chair. Yeah, I forgot to ask the first time around. It's with regard dog fouling, which crops up fairly regularly. About 12 months ago, we inquired as to whether there were any more of the clean it up signs that go on lampposts and things like that, because the majority in Linley Ward for sure are well faded and you can hardly read them, and we were told that there were none available. But then whilst walking through a neighbouring ward, there were some brand new spanking signs up, so just clarification really whether there's anything like that.
I think I caught the end of that. Yeah, I'll pick up with you offline. I imagine it was a literal answer that there was none in stock, as opposed to we can't sort something out. So I can pick that up with you outside of this, and I'll just email through so we can get the details.
Available for us to put up around the world.
I think
Don't
I'll
know
get
if
that
you
answer
heard that.
eventually.
Did you hear that, Will? I didn't quite catch it. No? Okay, we'll move on. We can come back to it. Councillor Taylor.
Thanks, Harpet, and thanks, Will. I was just going to come in to back Will up in terms of what he was saying to Chris around waste on land. We had a long-running issue with a gentleman in Kirkburton itself who was storing all sorts of rubbish on his land, and obviously the gentleman was struggling and was quite aggressive if he was approached about it, but the team were persistent, and eventually we did get to the stage where we were taking him to court, and finally his family have intervened, and the rubbish is now being removed and the issue resolved. So it does work, Chris, but it does take time when the landowner's not willing to do anything about it. So I just thought it was worth sharing that, really. Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Taylor. I don't think we've got Councillor Lowe back yet, and I think Councillor Eastwood was trying to type something, but we've lost him again. So we can pick those up after the session if they relate to specific ward issues at all. Okay, well, thanks for that, Will. I agree with what a number of colleagues have said. I think definitely this new structure and team, I think we've probably all seen it's made some impact and some difference actually in our wards, and you've got this sort of single point of contact, which is really good. I've got to say though, the figures like for Ashbright only shows that we only put in 2 requests, but I know I'm constantly requesting for fly tipping, so it might be just the route I'm taking, and that's why it's not showing up in those stats. So for my ward, we do have regular occurrences of fly tipping in particular parts, and I think that was my only thing. We spoke about this previously. Is just I know the spots, and the thing that I'm constantly having to report. I know where it's going to be. So every time I go for my walk, I'm like, saying all sorts of explicitives to myself, and I can't imagine what it's like for the team having to go back to the same site again and again and again. And I know this is a bit of a struggle, Will, but really it's just understanding how can we do a bit more of that proactive work in those particular sites and I think you are doing some more of that with the CCTV. Obviously, we'll have to see how that pilot works. In one bit of our ward, Occupation Road, for example, we have a lot of fly tipping. The team's doing some quite detailed work there. So it's just being able to pick that up in those specific neighbourhoods and really have a look at it and really trying to, I know there's loads of it. I'm saying that for my one ward, and I'm no doubt there's a number of neighbourhoods where this is happening, and I think we're getting there. But for me, it's just you know, what else could we do given the resources that you've got to really sort of focus on those really, you know, those bitty areas where it's just really frustrating, I guess, for neighbours, residents, councillors, colleagues as well, who are having to go to the same place again and again.
Yeah, we get as frustrated as everybody having to pick it up.
Yeah.
But no, I think like I've sort of gone through a lot of the stuff that's in stream. One of the things that we've looked at what other councils have done but haven't quite implemented, and I'd welcome sort of scrutiny panel's thoughts on that, is a reward scheme.
Yeah.
So some councils do take a proportion of the fixed penalty and say you get this proportion as a reward, or even pass it straight through. So if you, for example, come forward, you say, I've seen this fly tipping, here's the evidence, and we get a fixed penalty, that person gets the money, or a proportion of the money. We haven't implemented that. It's something that we've looked at, other councils have, but I'd welcome the panel's thoughts on that, because that might be a bit of a way to proactively encourage people to start tackling
bounty
this.
Is what it's called, isn't it?
But not sweets.
Yeah, I think that's definitely an interesting one. I don't know enough to understand if that's how well that's worked in other areas, and I think I'd want to understand the evidence base for that a little bit more. I know I also work in Oldham, and they have specific problems in alleyways, so these gated these alleyways where things are tipped there all the time. So they've done things with gates, which has some impact because you have to make sure the gates are closed for to, you know, and people still can lob it over. But the other thing they've done is try to put some focus funding into those to that street and say, look, we'll help you tidy it up. We can do this much, but can you then take some ownership of it, and they'll provide some funding around it. Now it works there because it's quite a contained area, and you've got the residents around there that can help to do it. Now I appreciate that's not always going to help here, but I think trying to understand where we can, and I think some of that work they're trying to do in Occupation Road is get the residents involved in it. So we do so much ourselves as staff and colleagues, and put that bit of money in, and then we try and provide some of that ownership with the residents that are really close by. And I'd like to see where we can do that, particularly in areas where it's just happening again and again and again.
I think they've tried that several times in Ravensthorpe, Chair, but unfortunately, they've had target squads and everything going there, as we'll be able to say, but unfortunately, that doesn't work like the example you're talking. It seems that when the target squads aren't doing it, the residents then don't pick up and look after the community. It may work in some areas. I think, if we could look at trialling that, areas like Mirfield, where we've got a very vibrant Mirfield in Bloom community, if we can make sure they're supported, but areas where people are neglecting their community to some degree, they have to take the responsibility for their own backyard.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think it's a bit of both, does it? Sorry, Will, go ahead. Sorry. I
was going to say we're secure, because you're right, because some of the issues we do have, where you get a really good relationship with some residents. They tend to be tenants, and then it's highly transient. So they're gone in a couple of weeks or a month, and that relationship needs building again. So what we did was secure some European funding about 18 months ago, and last year we started rolling out in some targeted specific streets, looking at actually can we give some the information on how to use the bins better, different languages, some simple signage as to where you put your bin, with little markings on the floor and things like that. So we've tried to look at very specific, almost street level as opposed to community level, to see if that makes a difference. We're also trying the Huddersfield bid we're working really well with, because some of these alleyways in the town centre we don't control, which is a frustration, but they're seen as our issue. And we're looking at actually can they persuade the businesses to get them off, and we might fund them, but it helps. And we're also we're going to trial down in Wood Street, for example. Can we get the bins off the streets, because they tends to attract waste? So can we use some of the spare shop unit we've got down there to put the bin as a bin store, an internal bin store? So then it's off the street. It creates Wood Street as a better environment for the nightlife, nighttime economy, and it stops that attraction of waste as well. So we are trying all these little bits, but I think like you said, we're starting to see a little bit of the things come to fruition now. I think people are starting to feel that we're picking up fly tipping quicker. You've seen we're starting to prosecute more. It's now where can we refine it and just enhance what we've done.
Yeah, absolutely. Agreed. And like you say, it's absolutely frustrating for everybody, isn't it, really, that are having to to go through this. Okay, thanks a lot, Will, and thank you for everything that your team is doing at a time where many of us have been told to stay at home, and they're obviously out and doing this work really at a challenging time as well. So it's of huge thanks and benefit to this to the residents of Kirklees that they're continuing this work. John, did you put your hand up?
Yeah, I've put speak in the chat.
Oh, sorry, I didn't see. There's so many stuff going in the chat. Sorry, I'm getting.
Yeah. So just a couple of comments really. The bounty thing you mentioned, Will, I just have a reservation about that, and because it could encourage neighbour disputes to escalate. Yep. So I'm just very nervous about us doing anything where we're going to reporting, because I can see them sticking the neighbours' letters in a bag and then saying it was the neighbour who left it. So just a little nervous about that one, if I'm honest. Just on litter bins, so as we've been using some ward funding and parish council funding to increase and replace our litter bins across the ward. But the one issue, and I have mentioned this to Colin, and I'd ask you guys to go away and look at. We had problems in the summer in some of our recreation areas and parks where the bins were overflowing continually. And this was because they are bins in parks, so they're not collected by the cleansing service. They're collected by parks and open spaces staff who don't collect as frequently. Obviously, it's a lockdown impact, because during lockdown, you couldn't go anywhere or do anything. And people were using open public spaces because they could meet in open public spaces. They were using the bins. They were going picnicking and things, and they were using the bins to put the rubbish in, but then the bins weren't being emptied. Yeah. So you just had loads of rubbish and litter around them. Can we have a look again at how we empty our litter bins? It's very, very difficult for us as councillors to explain to residents that there are 3 bins in a park and one of them will get emptied frequently and the other 2 won't, because it just is completely illogical, and residents they just can't explain it to them. They just think bonkers.
I completely understand that.
Go away and look at this and get a system in place where we bring together the teams that empty bins and we empty all the bins as frequently as other bins.
Well, the bit I didn't touch on the street cleansing improvements that we've got, but I can touch on a little bit now. Obviously, I mentioned the dreaded word austerity. They did open gaps in the services. That was one obvious one of them that's been, put under a magnifying glass, like you said, with such enhanced use during COVID. So what we have actually done just before Christmas, and should be starting to really gain momentum again now, is we increased our street cleansing resources close to back where it used to be. So there's 20 plus additional FTEs coming in on the manual sweeping routes. So we should start to see that lift, and that's then going to give us some of that flexibility to start picking up the parks bins as part of the core street cleansing service. Because you're right, the parks team are snowed under with the impact of climate change. The grass doesn't really have seasons anymore, so they don't really have that capacity to do the bins as well. So we're going to pick that up, and we've also put on a dedicated weed grubbing out squad as well. And we've got a subcontractor in to do dedicated weed spraying as well. We did a spray before Christmas, and we've just got the tender back now as a sort of one-off quick to see what happens. And now we've just got the tender back for a longer term, higher frequency weed spraying as well. So we are starting to close those gaps now that we're getting that resource invested back into the services. But I'll take that as a probably a priority. I think you're right, especially before we get into summer now. We don't want to be in the same situation. That's a fair point, that I think.
Thanks. And Chris, did you want to come in and then we'll move on to the next section? No? Oh, sorry, is your hand up from before? Okay, great stuff. All right, well, thanks for that, Will. There's, I think generally we want to provide our thanks to the team for all the work they've done. The new structure seems to be working well. There's some things that colleagues have raised for us to think about a little bit further. In terms of the bounty, I think perhaps a bit middleish on that. John Taylor definitely not keen on it if it leads to neighbourhood disputes. But I think for me, I'd want to understand the evidence base to see if this is something that could work or not. I think just understanding that a little bit better would be good. obviously Councillor Baltz raised a number of points too, and understanding the difference in how we look at the issues in rural areas compared to more built up areas as well, trying to understand that better. There were quite a few points made. I'm sorry, guys, I can't remember all of them, but I know Jenny's going to be expertly.
I've made lots of notes, don't worry.
You've made lots of notes, and I know Jenny's making lots of notes as well. We can always follow up again if there's anything that's been missed. But thank you very much, Will, and please pass on our thanks to the team as well. And take care. We'll see you soon. Thank you.
Thank you very much. See you later.
Thanks. See you later. So we've got the final item now. So we've got Jill Greenfield here, and this is about the Community Champions grant scheme. Hi, Jill.
Hi, everyone.
Hi. I'll hand over to you.
Okay, thanks, everybody. Just in terms of update in terms of the background to the fund, as previously had been shared, the fund was as part of the Public Health England review of disparities in risks and outcomes from COVID, and this was released in June 2020. And importantly, the report highlighted some of the disproportionate impacts of COVID-19, both in transmission rates and mortality amongst Black, South Asian and Pakistani communities, as well as with people with disabilities. The Minister for Equalities, based on this report and information, announced that they would be releasing some funding to support those communities that have experienced that disproportionate impact from COVID. The government then asked local authorities to fund those practical solutions, which resulted in the Community Champion scheme. As part of Kirklees put in an expression of interest in order to secure some of that funding and make sure that resource could come to our local authority, our district. And our key focus in doing that was to build some additional capacity so that we could respond to the immediate needs of both the testing and vaccinations, but also to make sure that we could actually have that engagement with some of the target cohorts. The target cohort for our expression of interest was our Black and minoritised ethnic communities, people with physical disabilities, including learning disabilities, and also unpaid carers. And in principle, what the work that we would want to do is to enable that by promoting both the infrastructure and the support for expanding that notion of community champions, which is relatively flexible. The scheme itself is relatively flexible, and working in partnership with our third sector, which was strongly encouraged by the government and our public health colleagues. We have submitted that expression of interest. We were hoping to hear some of the results of that have been embargoed, but we have continued to plan and prepare in the hopeful event of a successful notification. So unfortunately, I can't update on any work that's progressed because we are where we are. So I suppose the suggestion was just to say that what planning work we can do, we have been doing, and that we hope to be in a position to fully start that work on successful notification, and obviously then would be able to bring that back to scrutiny at a later date to update on the work that we've undertaken. And importantly, I think the learning that we have from doing that work would be really important. And I know that's what the government is interested in terms of the local authorities that will be funded. They are asking us to connect to some of the learning networks that will be set up through the scheme. So that will be something I'm sure that will be not only useful in terms of what we do in Kirklees, but also for future ways that we engage with our communities, and also how we create those ongoing dialogues that perhaps that we don't have at the moment. I don't know if there's any questions.
Thanks, Jill. Does any members want to ask questions? I think we've got some typing going on. I'll just everything's a bit go slow at the moment. I've got Councillor Taylor and then Councillor Eastwood maybe wants to ask a question, but we'll start with Councillor Taylor.
Thanks. Hi, Jill. I mean, this is really good news if we get this money, isn't it? And from what, if I've understood what we're saying is we're kind of ready to go. We're just waiting to get sign off on the funding, because I think those of us, you know, sort of myself and Peter are often on the outbreak control board, and you know, sort of you know, we'll hear then you know, that we do have some areas where we've struggled to get through to people, and you know, having local people in that area delivering those messages are probably going to be more powerful than, you know, somebody up on high trying to do that. So I think, you know, if this funding is going to make that you know, and is the enabler for that, I think that's really, really powerful, and I hope that it will be something that will remain with us once we've got this pandemic out of the way, because I think one of the learnings that come out of this pandemic is how important people's health is in terms of keeping them healthier and getting that message across, certainly in some of our communities, isn't it? So and I was really, really pleased to see that we haven't ignored people with disabilities, and particularly those with learning disabilities, because, you know, I've worked with a number of those myself, where actually trying to explain to them what social distancing is all about is sometimes really, really difficult. So, you know, the challenges and that their carers face is, you know, is significant. So I'm really, really pleased to see that's been a focus for our hopeful work that we'll get to do when we get the notification from the government. But yeah, I mean that's it really. But thank you.
Okay.
Thank you. Councillor Eastwood, did you actually want to say anything? Are we just letting us know you were back? I won't tempt fate with your connection. I'll tell you what, I'll leave you to it. Jill, I agree with, you know, everything that Councillor Taylor said as well. I think this is a good scheme, and it'll certainly help us going forward. I think we've understood more, especially with the community anchor network, just how important that, and the mutual aid groups, just how important that grassroots work is. I wanted to ask actually, just in terms of, and I know disabled people have been, you know, really badly affected by COVID, but we know they have generally, you know, the inequalities that disabled people face. So I think this will be really good, and I know a lot of disabled people have felt actually they've just been left out of the whole process, you know, in terms of COVID, and we haven't put enough. I say that nationally, we haven't put enough time and resource into them. So I'm, you know, as John said, really happy to see that. Just in terms of BAME people as well, I know there's some concerns, and there were some reports over the weekend, you know, regarding evidence around BAME people and vaccination uptake. And I was just wondering how, obviously this is potentially going to be a really good resource in terms of trying to help with that vaccination uptake. And I'm just wondering what, you know, what you're hearing in terms of our local communities, and if we've got, you know, particular concerns about vaccination uptake in particular, and, you know, perhaps with disabled people as well, there might be those similar concerns as well.
Yeah, sure. I think there are quite a few. We don't have to look far to see some of the social media that, you know, purports to the vaccine hesitancy, or either supporting people to or not. In terms of what we would aim to do with this is really, as Councillor Taylor highlighted, that what we'd be wanting to do is to create that real grassroots dialogue and enable people to start those conversations that isn't always an officer or a public health colleague, or a market, a corporate comms campaign. Those are all really, really important, and the message isn't any different, but it's actually sometimes who is having that conversation and how conversation is had. So I think in terms of our target and focus, we will be working on some of the work. We will absolutely be building on the work that we've done ourselves within the council, and also across our third sector partners and local grassroots community groups, and be looking for those leaders to take those conversations forward and really enter into that dialogue, because sometimes when there's no dialogue, that's even more worrying than just receiving a single message without opportunity to talk that through. So it's going to be multi-stranded, and I think the point around accessing communities where people with physical disabilities, learning disabilities, that they can often be to ourselves more hidden and not so visible as a community that we can particularly target readily. So we are working with our own networks internally, and also looking externally to see how we can really reach, go a bit further than we've been able to go before, really. And I think this will be a kickstart again of something that we can have longer term. It gives us that infrastructure for the future, and help us build that scaffolding. That means that these conversations can be ongoing, because the importance of an ongoing dialogue, as you reference, is beyond this pandemic. But in saying that, we completely recognise that there are some real access issues that we want to focus on in the first instance, because they're critical health inequalities that we need to try and contribute to all the other things that we're doing.
Absolutely, and I think building up that capacity with disabled people-led organisations as well will be crucial. I don't know how many DPOs we've actually got in the Kirklees area, but I think getting an understanding of that would be good as well. Councillor Hussain.
Hi Jill, thank you for that overview, and thanks for the fantastic work you and your team are doing. My question was kind of related to the vaccine side of things and trying to get the uptake up amongst the BAME community. I think word of mouth is a strong thing, and I think a lot of people that have had it have had side effects, but we need to educate people more to know when they do have vaccine what the side effects and symptoms would be of that. I know that a few people I've communicated to that work at Frontline, they have had it, and when they're communicating to others, they might understand the science, but the general layperson might not, and that can be quite off-putting. And that's something I've picked up generally across the ward, as well as generally across Frontline staff. There are symptoms, side effects of it, but it's obviously quite low. And taking it up, the vaccine itself would obviously be quite beneficial. And it's just a very specific area that I thought you might want feedback on, especially if you're trying to increase the uptake amongst the BAME community. All right, thank you.
Okay, thank you. John, Councillor Taylor.
Thanks. Sorry, I'm just doing a bit of reflecting. The challenge with the disabled community probably is the fact that a lot of the activities that they would normally be involved with, or the groups that they work with and everything, are all closed down. So they're very much sort of siloed, aren't they, in their own homes? So that sense of community is much more difficult for the disabled community, because, you know, if we're going to you know, sort of day centres, or, you know, I think of some of the groups that I've been to, like, you know, sort of the Age UK, or, you know, the partially sighted and blind sighted and things like that. They're not having physical meetings, so that contact is reduced, isn't it? So I think it probably is, in a way, more challenging to get into those communities. Once we've got the resources, getting into the BME community is probably easier, because it tends to be more place-based, doesn't it? A lot of the community, so we can access them more easily. But disabled, I think that's a fair old challenge. I'm not sure I've got the answer, but it probably is more of a challenge, isn't it?
Yeah, if I can just completely agree with that, and just make the reference that when we were submitting the proposals, we weren't aware that we would then be going back into lockdown as well. So we have been doing some work. Jo Richmond, Head of Communities, will be leading this work out, and she has been working with the teams to think about, okay, how do we adapt? How do we make the most of how we engage and support those communities, and really elicit the support of the community champions that we do know about, because there are alternative networks that may not be available to officers but are available for the community leaders that are already there, and that is everything that we need to be really pushing at the moment, and make sure that people start the conversations. Going back to Councillor Hussein's point, is really about how we ensure people have some facts to have a factual conversation where there is that hesitancy, even if that feels really borne out by one person's experience. It's the context of that, isn't it, that's really important.
Yeah, thanks, Jill. I mean, we've seen, haven't we, how quickly some of this misinformation does spread amongst communities, and all it takes is one friend and one WhatsApp message for it to just spread like fire. I know particularly in the Asian parts of the Asian community, some of the stuff that's been going around very quickly through social media and WhatsApp messages and stuff. And I think this is really good, Jill, in terms of being able to try and break down some of that misinformation and lies that are going on as well. Carol, did you want to say anything as the cabinet?
No, I'm sorry. Oh, I'm getting feedback. I missed, unfortunately, most of Jill's presentation, and all I can say is we're hanging on, waiting for the to hear how successful we've been. You're absolutely right about that misinformation, though. It's I mean, I was on a webinar for faith groups last night, trying to because that is where a lot of the misinformation or fear is being spread, and we really do not want BAME groups or the disabled to suffer any more disproportionately from this virus than they already have. So I think that's getting better, though, from what I hear. I mean, the more the vaccine is rolled out, the more people do, by word of mouth, community champions, they do tell each other, it's all right, really. And there's a lot of good messages on social media now, as well as those fearful ones. So this scheme will definitely help. Thanks.
Thanks, Councillor Patterson. That's great to hear. So thank you, Jill. Thank you for everything that you and your team are doing. You're really in the middle of it, aren't you, really? And as one thing stopped, another thing's started. And I've just been thinking about our teams recently, and I'm sure colleagues will agree. I mean, not only are we dealing with this lockdown, there's been issues around the snow, and then obviously we've had the localised flooding. So for our residents, for our colleagues, this has been quite a tricky time and we've only a couple of weeks into January, aren't we? Maybe going into our third week. So it's definitely been something. So huge thanks to everybody really who's working at this quite critical time for all of us. So thank you, Jill, and thank you, Councillor Patterson as well. So colleagues, we'll just quickly move on to thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Patterson. We'll just move on to our work programme. I don't know if colleagues want to add anything. Obviously, at the last meeting, we did speak about the major transport schemes, which we hope to have at our next meeting. And we've also been asked. We're looking at perhaps a digital update as well at the next meeting, but we're just speaking with colleagues about that. Have we got anyone? I think we've got John. Yes. Sorry, I can't see everything properly, John, so apologies, but yes.
All right.
Go ahead.
So I've got a couple of things actually. One, and I'm thinking I should have mentioned it earlier when Will was on was on the call because it's probably in his area. But I'd like us to have a look at winter maintenance.
Yeah, I agree.
But specifically linking it to planning. So as we are building more houses and building more roads, we need to look again at how we are delivering winter maintenance to make sure that we're covering the entirety of it and including some of these new areas, and what is the role of the development and what funding are we getting. I mean, I'm being a bit parochial, but I mean, I've had quite a lot of grief in one of my villages, Flops, and they've had quite a lot of housing development over the last couple of years, but no additional gritting and no additional grit bins. So, you can understand why the residents are going, well, we've got 3 grit bins in our village and we suddenly got a bit bigger. But I just think it'd be useful to have just a bit of a look at that, and also a bit of a reflection on, as you were just saying, to be honest, Harper, about we have had a week and a half of challenging winter weather, haven't we? So it probably is appropriate to look at that as well. The other one, I think I mentioned this in one of our previous meetings, but it doesn't appear on the plan anywhere. And this is the smaller town initiatives. So we've got the Dewsbury and the Huddersfield blueprint, haven't we? But then there is some funding coming forward for smaller towns. And my understanding was there was going to be something coming to Cabinet at some point, but we could do with having the opportunity to scrutinise what is being discussed and planned before, it's too late in the process. So if we could perhaps try and prioritise that. And then I know that, we make mention in the forward plan about the Huddersfield blueprint that we looked at last year. But I wonder whether the Dewsbury Town deal is something that perhaps ought to be coming through the scrutiny panel as well. And, this would probably be the appropriate place for that to be scrutinised. So if we wouldn't mind adding those 3, so we've got winter maintenance and the planning impact, the smaller town initiatives, and then the Dewsbury Town Board plans. All right.
Yes, I'm sorry, my screen is just going all over the place at the moment. So you've moved to a different position now, but I can see you. I agree, actually. I was thinking about winter maintenance just this morning, John, when I was going through the work programme. So I think, I agree. We should put that in, and we can obviously look at planning alongside that. In terms of the town centres and villages, there is a bullet point under number 7, consideration of the wider context of other town centre villages. So it's not quite as clear as what you're saying, but I agree, we probably need to just get that scheduled in. And I know you've mentioned Dewsbury previously as well. So I think we could probably look at both of those things. Given that we've got one more meeting this council year, if everything stays as it does with the elections, we'll obviously probably need to timetable it in for after, if we do have May elections after that. But I agree, it should come soon as possible. It might be helpful for us to at least get a written update for this final council year at least, and then we can have a proper have it properly programmed in for when it comes back, depending on who the chair is at that stage as well. So absolutely fine. We'll get those in, John. Sorry, Councillor Taylor, I'm trying to do it properly, but I keep going to first names. Councillor Bolt.
No, first names are fine. So, don't stand on ceremony. Fully support what John says. I mean, this is something that Mirfield Town Council raised with Kirklees some while ago. So, as John has said, that developers come along. You're building estates. I mean, we've got one in Mirfield which is going to have 166 homes when it's fully completed. Some of those could be a quarter of a mile, half a mile away from the main road that gets gritted. We see when we take a contribution in planning to build a playground on an estate, leisure services take what's called a commuted sum, a maintenance sum for a period of years. So they to use John's and I'd widen it as well to say that we should be looking at waste bins. We've just been talking about litter and stuff. Where you're building bigger estates, industrial estates, there should be a provision of waste bins and a commuted sum. So you pay for the installation of this facility, and you pay, in the case of the grit bins, you pay a sum that would cover the cost of topping it up with winter grit for X number of years. That would be part of the standard planning process. I'm looking at Peter on the screen. I hope he agrees that the developer should pay. Yeah, they're building all these houses.
Martin, there's a problem there. You get a commuted sum for a given period of time. Let's say it's 5, 6, 10 years. After that, the responsibility falls on the local authority. The central government doesn't necessarily pick up the tab or give the government give the local government the money that it needs. And that is, I'm not blaming a Tory government. Yeah. All governments tend to do this. Just forget about it. And the local authorities are, well, financially to that degree diminished. And it's
after that period of 5 years, what you do have, Peter, is, again, using the Mirfield example, you have 166 houses who are paying council tax and who would then reasonably say, yeah, I can't get out of my estate because the roads are full of ice and snow, etc. What am I paying my council tax for? When just down.
As you know, John.
Okay, I think we are covering the work programme here, so I think we've noted that point now. So we'll move on. Councillor Hussain.
I think my hand was up during the previous one, so I'll put it down. Apologies. But if you let Councillor Peter finish, that's fine, yeah.
Just a quick.
All right, okay.
We've covered
You want me to answer that, Martin? Council tax only represents about 1/3 of the total cost. So, it's a source of income. It's not the most important source of income. That's one of the problems.
Okay, thank you. So that's the work programme, I think, covered now. With a bit of chat around
the end of the first lesson.
So it's I'm almost sorry I mentioned it. It's an important point, but yeah, we'll move on now. So any other, does anyone want to mention anything else?
If I could, I mean, I mentioned Peter and he kindly jumped in. If we could have flood resilience as well, Chair, I think that's something which covers a wide area. Cabinet the other day, Councillor Davies agreed with me that it will be beneficial to look at a district-wide forum or something, but looking at flood resilience throughout Kirklees, both in terms of surface water flooding and river water and other flooding. We could then sort of assist Cabinet by looking at things like what are they doing in other areas such as Calderdale and North Yorkshire in terms of natural flood, and I think that would be something hopefully with a great benefit to the community.
Yep, I think that's a good point as well, Martin, as Councillor Bolt. So thank you very much. I'm trying to stick one way or the other.
Yeah, we'll bring you around to the dark side.
There you go. And with that, I think that's the end of the meeting now. So thank you, colleagues. Please take care, all of you, and we'll see you at the next meeting. So thank you very much.
Thanks, Chair.
Thanks. Bye.